Welcome to Slated for Tomorrow.
Hey everyone, I am James Arachuri, your host with the most, and our co-host is
Sandy Sharma. And what do we do here?
We talk about the passion, the purpose, and the superpower of our guests. And we just so happen to have one of your dear friends. Do you want to introduce them?
Tom Casey. Thank you for being here, Tom.
It is great to be here.
Tom's been a friend for, I think, about 15 years almost now.
Yeah,
getting close to that.
Yeah, but you know what? We got to get into who he is, though, right?
Yes,
so he's a
absolutely.
digital innovator. He's a data pioneer. Oh, that's going to be fun. He's the SVP of Product and Technology at Splunk. He has a historic career from over the 25 years of product and service innovation, spanning from 9 Mile Labs, a Seattle-based startup accelerator, all the way back to DocuSign and Microsoft. Tom, thank you for coming on.
Great. It's good to be here with you guys.
Let's talk about passion. You have many, but tell us about a few that fuel you.
Growing things and building is just so important. I feel like, not to be too sentimental about it, but it's fundamentally what we're doing as people too. And there's that notion of constantly learning something just drives me. And so being in a spot, I feel so fortunate to have, I refer to myself as a failed biochemistry major because that's where I started school.
Okay.
And falling back on tech when I did 30 years ago was one of the best choices I could have made. I've ended up in a field that's just changing so fast. I'm constantly learning. So
Tell us more about that story.
well, I mean, that one's pretty simple. It's actually this notion of helping the people around you kind of find their focus and their purpose and doing the rest. And I guess absence is what did it for me. So I was one of the only non-pre-med biochem majors at the University of Arizona in mid-'80s when I was in the school,
Okay.
late '80s when I was in the school there. And I never saw my professor and advisor. I only saw his secretary to sign off on my stuff. And it took me a while, but after a couple of years, I realized I'd be, if I wanted to go do research, would be begging for money, and that was mostly my life. And I decided that's not good. I want to be in a lab building something, discovering something, doing something. And I unplugged from that. And after a short wander through some other crazy ideas of ways I would spend my time, including helping a friend make a movie in a parking lot once that involved me laying on the ground with soda cans exploding all over me. I did what I was always doing on the side, which had something to do with computing, and just kept down that path. And I feel just so fortunate. I mean, the timing. You talk about the right timing to be in an industry. The magnitude of change I think that we have been through in the last 30 years is just incredible. It's hard to find precedent for it outside of what's happened in tech.
Fair. In fact, now in 3 months, right? Every 3 months, the changes you see are just amazing. So
But the patterns are similar, I think.
Patterns are similar.
As you and I have talked about before.
Just the acceleration at which it's going now.
Yeah.
So first tech, divide your life in a few phases as you would. Tell us the big chunks and what the story is, how you went along it. And it's a very inspiring story, so I'd love to kind of share it with our guests.
Yeah, it's hard to think about inspiring from a values perspective. It's not how I think about myself.
Okay. Yeah.
It's that sense of being a work in progress, learning and figuring it out as you go. And I think, we were talking about this before we started, but I'm the last of 8 kids. There's an 18-year spread between me and the oldest. And for anybody listening who's been the younger kid, while people like Sandy who are older kids will tell us we're spoiled, the other thing, the other fact, maybe the way we're really spoiled and people don't appreciate is there's always somebody better than you, bigger than you, stronger than you early in your life who's farther along and doing things you're not allowed to do but you want to do.
And you're catching up.
Yeah. And that did 2 things for me, I think. One, it gave me that drive and sense to go reach beyond what I'm doing now and try to do something else. And the second thing it did is it got me uncomfortable. It got me comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? With taking a stretch, with trying things maybe that I was fearful of. And so I think that phase of my life, family is an important central part of my life. But I think that early experience, like most people, I didn't appreciate. But boy, I see it reflected in every other stage of my life in a big way. And then, I think I divide my career sort of into 3 sections. I think about the early stage startup. My father worked 45 years for Westinghouse Corporation, one company.
Nice. Amazing.
Could you imagine people doing that today, though? Very few do.
Yeah, usually it's only consulting firms, right? I met a gentleman yesterday that's been with Deloitte for 25 years.
But that's changed too. That's changed a lot now.
Yeah.
Or Costco, who I work with pretty regularly. They have people that have been there for like 39 years.
Yeah.
No, my father was a professor at the university throughout his life. That's what he did, and he retired there.
Yep.
So that
And
kind of stuff happens.
And some of the small business owners, people
Yeah.
with a lifestyle business that grow it and continue to do that, and it's the family business and it's their passion. I think those things are wonderful as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to tell you, watching, my dad work one place, one thing for so long, I just didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
And so I worked startups when I first moved here. I was a hands-on developer, a lot of learning, a lot of creating, a lot of being around people that were.
What was the startup community though, like back then versus today? Was it more job security? Did a lot of companies still fail a lot back then?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
And what was the motivation to go there? Was it an easier entry point, like compared to now? Like, what is it?
It's interesting reflecting back. I mean, kid out of school, I needed a job, so there was a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But I think the choices of where I worked were driven more by, the technology or the domain, kind of the type of thing I could learn. I've always had a ton of passion around kind of data and data movement and velocities and those sorts of things. And so, I worked on ticketing and concession systems for stadiums, arenas, and movie theaters early on,
Nice.
which is kind of cool. So I've wandered around what's now Key Arena.
Yeah.
Cool.
And
Climate Pledge Arena now.
Is it Climate Pledge now?
Yeah.
Is that what it's called? Yeah. So Climate Pledge Arena, as it is now, I wandered around there, 3 decades ago, because you not only wrote the software in a small business, you have to go do the implementation. And
There's no team engineering sitting there and customer success manager on the.
yeah, and so
You're the one-stop shop.
Yeah, so one of the great things a startup gives you is kind of that
Yeah.
transitive closure to customer value early on, because you have to do everything, and you want to talk about living with your mistakes in your design choices.
Yeah.
get
You're very
out there
grounded.
and, get out there and do the implementation and have it go wrong. And so I think those things are powerful. And so I think there was a bit of that early stage. Again, a lot of my learning is my learning, and I don't realize it till later. But there was a lot of that sort of value of customer development. That
Can I I want to actually go into that, because I think a lot of people in their right out of college try to figure out, should I go Microsoft or should I go, like the big tech, right? Or should I go startup? And it used to be that you went big tech for job security, but then obviously all the layoffs demystified that, there's such thing as safeness in employment. And so I wanted to, you've clearly done the executive track at Microsoft. You've done the startup track. I'd love to get your nuggets of wisdom around, what do you think the values are for choosing startups versus going corporate?
The fundamental principle of that is wrong at that stage in your life and in your career.
You're asking the wrong question.
Yeah. How long do you think you're going to... how long you been working, Sandy, since you got it?
30 years.
So you said that's the wrong question to ask. What do you think are the right questions to be asking at that age?
I think the right question at this stage is, what do I want to explore?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Not just what do I want to learn, because learning kind of implies that we have refinement to it and a sense of an answer we're seeking or a skill we're trying to develop. I think at that stage, you have not had a job. You have all, maybe you've done some internships, but you really don't know what it's like to work as a developer in a large team, a tester in a large team, to do product management in collaboration with people for more than 3 months at a time. You haven't even seen all the roles and responsibilities. You've maybe never seen in tech, for example. You've never seen a really good research organization that follows like the jobs to be done framework and is doing real customer-centric research. How do you know? How do you know at that stage what you're going to learn?
Can I bring up something very interesting? I just want to dig in here a little bit. The things you mentioned are so much more beyond my coding skills and my richness ambition.
Yeah.
Somehow I feel, though, that when you're younger, you just see just those two simple things. Oh, I'm a good coder, I'll go to a startup, and I'll make my millions, right? But the rest of the wisdom, the learning, that journey and that path is so critical to that actual success.
Yeah.
And in fact, when you ask me, it's not 30, I just realized it was 40 years. So at 16 is when I did my first startup.
16?
Yeah. And it was like, I was actually making money on it. It was vinyl record.
What was it like?
So we were just vinyl record players, amplifiers and speakers.
So you sold the whole thing together?
No, it was I would custom make the kits. Literally custom make. You could.
It's a little hi-fi company.
Exactly.
Going on.
Yeah. And the best part was, You got invited to all the dance parties because you had
you were the DJ. You were
had
the
equipment.
DJ.
That's pretty good.
That's smart.
So this is the difference in an extrovert's approach, talking about the way our brains and our styles work. The extrovert's approach and the introvert's approach. I was looking around kind of that sense of, okay, what's the kind of category of things I want to explore? I had this false notion early in my career that I someday want to do the job I have now, but that in order to do it, I had to do every job that job would ever manage or interact with.
Okay.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
I've never been, the chief architect focused on machine learning in a company somewhere, but I got to be able to add value and manage those people. And so it takes a while. And so figure out what you're excited about and what you want to explore. And then the way we choose, I think, jobs and get our value out of it is part of it's around your money. You got to make a living and you have your own lifestyle choices, and that's great. But think about, what do you value? Is it money? Is it growth in stock? Is it some element of title? Is it managing people or not? Is it the domain you work in?
Some people it's work-life balance, that freedom to do other things on the side.
That's right. Is it the culture? I mean, so many companies. In fact, any large, durable company has a well-defined culture.
Yeah. Ooh. And it's very obvious.
What do you think? What is Splunk's culture?
We have around our core values, the ones that I really attach to, that I love. It's this idea that we want to be innovators. We also want to be disruptive, including disrupting ourselves.
You're doing a good job in the security space.
And well, we are, but I think we can do a heck of a lot more in terms of being disruptive in the space and helping people to look at security not in isolation as single tasks and incidents, but tying that together, because there is no. I've run a bunch of large-scale services. I've managed the CISO function before, and IT and other things as well. And I will just tell you, just as there is no security incident that occurs that you don't have to mitigate operationally in your environment to put new controls in place so it doesn't happen again, there is no, in a large-scale web property, 3x increase in latency or error rate or a spike in your traffic that you didn't expect at a point in time that you don't worry is either an external threat vector asserting itself or is potentially masking one. It's a head fake. And so those two things have to come together. And you asked a little about what I think people should be looking for.
Yeah.
I use that exploration time to figure out what my values were. One of them is this change the world idea. And for me, if I got one more turn of the crank in me, the reason I'm at Splunk, I've only been there 6 months. The reason I'm there and the reason I think we have this opportunity to go change the way the world works and make it more seamless for the way you observe what's happening in an environment and the way you secure an environment, make that a much more virtuous cycle and potentially change the way apps are built again.
Could you close out on that phases we were talking about? So first one was the startup phase, second, third. The 3 phases of your professional career.
So I think that the early part of my career was a lot about exploring and understanding what I value. Right?
Okay.
What's the path I want to be on and what I value? And I encourage people to make those choices that way. What are you trying to learn? What are you trying to explore? And then I think there was an element of increased surety for me. And I would say my period of time then at post-startups and at Microsoft, I was learning to scale things. And while I think I was effective at applying it there, I got to be part of growing the SQL business and worked on the expansion to the transition to the cloud, consolidation of what's now the Microsoft account and the online billing platform into one system. Some really cool things. Yeah, you actually helped with a couple of those through your company on a consulting basis. But it wasn't until after that when I stepped off and went to apply that outside of that environment with the structure.
Tell me about
that
those
I realized how much I loved the growth phase. And so kind of that growing companies is a thing I know you care about a lot too, Sandy.
So was it accidental though?
It was fun.
The switch from the startup to the big company and then back?
Intentional.
So tell me about that. What went on in your mind and what were you exploring?
The switch to the big company was accidental.
Okay.
The switch out of it was intentional. The big company switch and going in, I'd worked in startups. You were talking about earlier. People don't feel like the big companies are so secure anymore. Believe me, startups pre.com era even were not either. You had to put
right now, nothing seems secure.
Yeah, nothing's secure.
Yeah, nothing's secure anymore.
But nothing ever was back then. Yeah. And if there's ever a time to go do it, maybe we're getting back to a stage where we're becoming empty nesters again. Sandy and I with kids the same age, but when you're young and single and right out of school, that's a pretty good time to take some risks.
Yes.
But I went through the first company I was part of got sold. I had a chance to move to Denver in 1991, back when it was the pit of despair in the technology industry and not a great place, right? That didn't feel good to me. Yeah. So I stayed, but I was out of work for a little while, first time in a year, and went and found another job. I had another company before I went to Microsoft that went through rounds of layoffs where I was a manager, I had to lay off some people, and then eventually made that transition. And what brought me to Microsoft wasn't anything of my doing. In a sense,
it was Bill Gates calling you and saying, "Hey, we need you, bud."
That would have been nice, but no, Bill didn't call. But what actually happened was I was working for a company in the file system database community. There were a lot of database startups, and when Access got bundled with Office, it just kind of took the air out of that market.
Yeah.
Right?
I remember that. Yeah.
And so two things occurred at that point. The market for independence, it was hard for those companies, and it changed.
But those skills were needed at Microsoft.
Microsoft needed the skills. And so they started hiring people from IBM and Oracle and DEC, and a bunch of us from the database community, the file system database community, as part of building that. And that was a ton of fun to kind of come in. So that was the accidental part. And then the intentional part on the exit was I just started feeling too removed from customers. You and I talked about it a lot, Sandy, back then. And our little 9-mile journey together was
tell us about that.
Was fun.
Well,
tell us about that a little
Sandy,
bit.
before we go into 9 Mile, you put a pin right there, because I want to get some actionable insight for the younger audience.
Oh, sure.
Going back to, so I'll give an example. I have two people I know that are just graduated college. One didn't graduate college. So say they're like 22 years of age. One decided to go to be a dental hygienist, then just realized, they didn't want to go into dentistry the more they spent in there. So now they're trying to figure out what do they want to do. 22. The world is their oyster. The way I told them, it's like, you literally are 1 year past being legally able to drink. You have so much of your life ahead of you.
Yeah.
4 years prior, you weren't even an adult. And so now they're trying to find themselves. They love makeup. And my advice to them was like, well, if you love makeup, and like they were thinking maybe I'll go make tutorials or videos on that, kind of like the YouTuber influencer. I said, why not also, maybe you want to go into the makeup industry. Maybe you want to go reach out to L'Oreal's and these brands and learn from them. And then maybe you branch out while doing the same. But they're at that stage where like, I don't know what I want to do. How do you coach people that are actively trying to figure out and are willing to put the effort in?
There are two paths for that. And I think your advice to your friend is one of those, which is those are exactly the kind of places where, go work for a big company or with, somebody local who you trust and will let you get a broader view of the business. Yeah. Because again, you're trying to explore.
Yeah.
You're trying to figure out what you want, what you value that you're going to carry forward. Early in your career, you need a job and you need to figure out what you want. And so that's one method.
Yep.
The other way to go about that is, and for some people, if your style is such, go understand kind of the system or the ecosystem that it operates in, and pick one or two things and deliberately have a job. Plan on changing. Yeah, but plan on changing jobs. Either go do a consulting thing where you can be a part of that and get a survey and see a lot of it. That's another avenue. Or literally just have a mindset that says, look, I trust I can figure it out. I'm going to be a saver rather than a spender so that I have a little financial security if I get in trouble. Yeah. But I'm literally going to deliberately plan to go have a job for like 2 years and then either change my role or change the company.
I'd like to add a little
please.
tidbit to that, because the thing is that there used to be classic value chains first, right? And people say, I'm going to go up the value chain or down the value chain. Now it's become ecosystems, right? And you're seeing industry lines are blurring. So the opportunities to go in any of those paths is so many. You can create your own pathway. Yeah. But you said this to me when we were having coffee just recently. Actually, it was about 3 months ago, wasn't it? I think it was 3 months ago.
Could be recent for us. I don't know.
We talked about strength and joy, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it's only, you get so late in your life to explore that concept.
The strength and joy?
Strength and joy quadrant. Tell us about that.
So I actually give people coaching on this a lot. And this is why I think it's so important to explore early in your career. Okay. How often have you received advice that says, hey, these are your weaknesses, go work on your weaknesses?
Well, probably like every 6 months, because I at least ask
Yeah.
I think there's a difference. Like I've learned the value of asking for it versus just assuming people are going to give it to you.
Yeah.
I think it's important to know to do that. And I think if you're doing that in order to learn something, great. But what I will say is, by the time somebody's had a couple jobs and decides what their career is going to be, antithetical advice from Tom, stop focusing on trying to fix your weaknesses. You are who you are. You're not going to change fundamentally who you are. Play to your strengths and play to your joy. And then when you get later in your career, like the reason I have the job I have right now isn't because of my broad competence in, as an engineering and product leader. There were lots of other people who have broad competence for engineering and product leaders because somebody saw something different in me as a choice they had to make out of candidates in that case. That is true for every senior hire I make. And so I always ask in an interview question with senior people, I ask them about, I want to know what brings you great joy.
Yeah.
We are all a collection of our experiences and our ambitions. I want to know what your ambition is, and I want to know what brings you great joy. And then we'll explore whether you have the strength in order to do that.
Can I want to
And this is actually a good conversation because very few of us actually even go down that path of exploring it. Because I want to give you the
joy part?
The opposite of it. There are some things I'm very good at. However, at this stage in my life, or even earlier, I didn't enjoy doing them so much. So that's why the quadrant of
Strength
you're
versus
good
joy.
at it, it's a strength, but you hate it.
Yeah.
Don't go there. Because it'll bring you down, it'll
sucks
upset people
everything
around
else in
you.
your life, yeah.
If you stay just in the strength and joy quadrant, right? X-axis is I'm good at, bad at, or whatever, whichever way you want to see it. But that's the quadrant
And
you
then
want to
I
stay
would
in.
even dovetail
The
to say,
consultant's turning it into a framework.
Yeah,
by the way.
it is a
You notice
framework.
that?
but
Sandy's
I would even dovetail into that saying that, you don't only have one strength.
Doesn't matter.
Right? I think
And contextually it'll
It's plural.
change.
It changes.
Strengths and joys is a fine way to think about it.
I like that then. Like
Yeah.
there's strengths
It
and
is
joys. And it's so funny too because I think though it's important to be around an environment that does acknowledge your strengths because I think I was in an environment like I was telling Sandy for 2 years I had an unsupportive leadership team. Didn't care about my career, whatever. And I knew I was like okay at my job, but I didn't know what I was always second guessing myself because I never got haptic feedback. And I'd ask for it and they didn't give it. And eventually I was like, fine, I'll go take my toys and go play elsewhere. And once I started going to the job market, I started talking to VPs like yourself or, executive, what?
You were talking about haptic feedback. I remember a joke from Microsoft. They said
What?
they had a little pin under somebody's chair. If they crossed the number of lines of errors in their code, the pin would pop up. That was haptic feedback.
I heard that joke. I like that one.
Oh my God.
You wanted haptic? There it is.
There was a lot of haptic. There's a goodness in the elements of the old
But sorry.
Microsoft culture of being.
I hope that was an actual joke and that
It
was,
is a joke. But it could be a little punch.
it was a joke. It could be real.
a punch.
It could be real. So I started talking to executives like yourself. And in the first, the funny thing they would say to me is like, wait, you actually want to work with us? I never thought of myself as like having such strengths to the point where they saw it. And the sad part is like, I think a lot of people, especially once you get to maybe my stage, middle career, 12, 13 years, if you don't go elsewhere and start exploring, you may not even realize what your strengths are being recognized for because some places don't acknowledge your strengths. And they're just not rewarding you for it. And they're just like, sure, like here's more responsibility, or you get passive for promotion, blah blah blah.
That's bad culture. It's just bad culture.
And it's not. And big companies like have some great culture. Like I know there's some great teams at Microsoft. Just so happened at my team, it was just kept getting reorged. It just was. It just there was no existing culture anymore. Because when you reorg enough of a company or a team, that culture that made it strong is gone. And I still think it's the coolest moment is my MD, who's basically like yourself at Google. He would get on a call, first 15 minutes in is like, I'm going to hire you. And I did not expect the conversation like that. I thought we were just talking.
Yeah, you felt wanted at that
I was
point
like,
and valued in some way.
insane.
Yeah.
Wow. I was like, that's who I want to work for. Anyway, sorry.
No, look, you actually use the explore word there a little bit. It's why I come back to this notion of especially
The explorer word?
Explore. You talked about, exploring. And I come back to this idea of exploring what you want to do early in your career being so important. And then later in your career, I think it's being intentional about the experience you want to gain.
So you were saying there are phases, right? We were talking about the startup phase, the corporate phase.
And then I think this is the next one. That's what you were about to tell us about.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think for me, actually, the phases really are the formative phase as a child, kind of learning that, striving and developing that desire for learning. Then it was the startup phase around exploring, but maybe not realizing that's what I was doing. And then it was the post-Microsoft phase where it was like, okay, I know what I want to do. I'm a builder, and I need that combination of sufficient scale, but the ability to still touch and see my customers on a regular basis. You know, if you get in a big corporate
one.
Yeah, you get in a big corporate job.
But Tom, you did that even at Microsoft, because I remember, and I'll quote back what you said to us. We were a small little startup trying to do an education startup, but just improving personalized education in the cloud.
Yeah.
Microsoft's cloud was not even called Azure then, right? And you called us in because you guys were doing customer discovery. And I told you about our vision, what we were trying to do. And he came out of that conference room and told me this. He says, you go ahead and keep building what you want for your customers and the teachers. Don't worry about us being able to support it or not. That's our problem. That was pretty incredible for somebody at Microsoft to tell a small startup, you go do what's right for your customers and we'll take care of the rest. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, in terms of the dependencies you needed in the back end.
Exactly.
And how that would evolve.
And they're like, don't worry about whether we have the feature or not. You tell us. So I think that's good.
That's unique.
That's good.
Yes.
I just think, one of the challenges can be in those roles. I have more people now than even I did then, I think. But you get to a role where you've got 2,000, 3,000 plus individuals. You're managing a portfolio of things in a business. A lot of that job's operational, and you're dealing with that. And a lot of people try to orchestrate your time.
Fair.
And I like meetings where I'm learning something and I feel like I'm adding value.
Yeah.
And I want to roll up my sleeves a little bit and get engaged. And that does get harder in some of these big jobs. Now, sometimes that's what people value and they love it. It just doesn't fit what I value. And I learned what I valued early on because I bothered to explore.
So what advice would you give to executives in your position that are also probably struggling how to get that value out? Like, are there certain things that you do to ensure that happens within a meeting? Because I observed, and this is just like from my consultative career, right, that the higher you get up, the less closer to the truth you get.
Yeah.
And it's like the yes man problem, or, let's be equal, the yes women and men problem, where, people don't want to give you, they soften the truth, they mitigate it. And as a result, you can't even get the real actionable insights to give feedback. So how do you mitigate that, especially in your position?
I think a big part of it is who you surround yourself with, and again, being intentional about setting the expectations you have from others that you want that. And so whether it's about in our mid-career work-life balance that we need and actually saying that to our employers and the people around us and our teams so they're aware. Usually people will accommodate you and come to you. You just got to not be afraid and say it. Or it's about, hey, look, I actually want to have a mix of meetings with customers where I'm learning things and where I'm just, it's Festivus time. It's the airing of grievances meeting.
Yeah.
And they can come at me all day long and I'm not going to sit there and be afraid. I'm going to listen and I'm going to help in the follow-up and I'm going to support the account team and, in sales and go do that. And I want a mix of those. And if you're clear about that and principled, you can get it.
You know what I also saw that Tim Cook does? He makes his email publicly available. And he says he spends about an hour a day going through public complaints in his email, which I think is pretty cool. Obviously, he probably gets a lot.
Yeah.
But that was one of the ways he does it. Has you ever heard of the book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team?
Lencioni is one of my favorite authors, and my favorite book is actually Death by Meeting. But tell me about.
I don't know that.
Tell me about 5 dysfunctions.
Oh, so I
know the book.
Oh, no. That's why I was talking about it, because that's how I learned. I read this book in college. Because I was becoming aware of the yes man problem.
So to your point, people surround themselves with yes men. The opposite, a step away from that is surrounding yourself with people who get along, or people who will support kind of what you're trying to do. I actually think you need to create an environment where you've got compliments to yourself in the room, and you're embracing the notion of people who come with a different point of view, a different background, and a different experience. Right?
And a different personality style too, because that's the other problem. Like whether it's Myers-Briggs or any of those things you do, if you just have the reds in the room or the yellows in the room, it's just a very different dynamic. You don't have balance.
I love that you said. And there was a book. There's a book on the Fierce Conversations. by Susan Scott, I believe. And she did this beach ball analogy. And like you have the different color beaches, like accounting sees red and sales seems green. And like how, and like the art is making everyone be able to like at least still create a holistic ball that bounces and holds the air together.
Yeah.
But they each have their different functions and whatnot. And the whole story is like, you have to have fierce conversations. You can have them respectfully
And be fair.
fair.
Yeah.
I haven't read the book. I don't know the beach ball analogy, but if you think about that notion of a sphere and the strength of that shape, and if you can keep the challenge, the argument, the debate, the conflict constructive and contained within that ball without overinflating any one part of it and finding a weakness that blows the whole thing out. Boy, that's a really durable structure. It's also wicked fun because you can toss it around at a concert.
And I like this big.
At a concert. Is that what
That's what
But
got
it's
me.
the most fun.
No,
the most fun.
because I just imagine the
fought-
beach ball floating in the air, and
We fought like heck doing 9 miles.
Oh, we fought.
it's like the same principle though for any just even personal relationships, which is as long as you're both agreeing you're in the boat together,
Yeah.
and regardless of how rocky it gets, hence the fierce conversations going back and forth. Like you're not going to nuke the marriage or nuke the relationship. It's us fighting together to save the relationship, not it's me against you to save the relationship.
Yep. We talked about passion a lot, right?
Yeah.
We talked about purpose as well, which has driven you. Superpower. What do you think your superpower is, and
Well, hold
how
on.
have you honed it?
What do you
and-
think his superpower is based on? You know him now.
Yeah,
I'm
you've known
curious
me
to see.
15
I'm throwing
plus
you on the
years.
spot, Sandy.
I want him
curious
to.
too, 'cause
I want
I'm
him
looking
to
for
play
the
it back.
answer to this myself.
No, go for it.
Is he dodging you?
I'm going to bounce back then.
Okay.
Go for it.
That matter, that then you can make decisions on or make peace with, and allow you to choose the positive space you're going to focus on, the negative space you're going to ignore. And I will tell you, whether it's in a large company, a growth company, or a startup, figuring out it's the classic lean model canvas, right?
Yep.
You got to get to the point of what are the critical assumptions that we need to go validate in order to be able to move forward together. And so that would be mine. Okay, Sandy,
so
tell me.
I
what
was
the
gonna
real-
play back and
tell me
say
what the real
he-
Well,
answer
Sandy,
is.
if I want to summarize that, what I heard is a distillation of complex.
Open, trusting conversations for that reason, and because you're very quickly, it's not about let me see what Tom is really trying to do. Like, what is his agenda? You'll never have that feeling in
just
your
tell
mind. You'll just tell us. So it's one is being open, the other is actually working on building trust. You've always done that.
Yeah.
Whether it's your peers, your superiors, your coach, people you're coaching. I like that a lot because that's not easy. And maybe you just do it innately and you don't know you're doing it, but you genuinely care about it.
Yeah, I think-
that is a big superpower.
Yeah, it's
I
huge.
appreciate that. I appreciate that.
It's an important one. So tell me this. This is, I'm going to ask you something which is actually a little interesting. In the stories that you've been talking about, whether it's customer development we did at 9 Mile Labs in the startup world, or in big engineering firms, or big giants, share a story or two of something horrible that was going on from an engineering point of view.
Oh.
And then how you guys pivoted and got to the right path. I'd love for just any story, and you don't have to name the company if you don't want to.
Yeah, well, I've worked for a couple of recognizable brands, so it's probably recognizable problems in some cases along the way. I think there are a few. I think there's the example early on in my career when I was working in a file system database company and Access was bundled with Office. That was a great lesson, and sometimes it's not what you're doing, it's paying attention to what other people do that can completely change the environment around you. And it just, the bundling of Access with Office, even though it was largely shelfware in a lot of cases that it was deployed, really took the air out of an entire market, and it kind of did it overnight. And that was a lesson in self-awareness at a kind of a corporate level and a market level that I think was really valuable.
And if I may,
and there was nothing we could do.
That's
we
my
could
point.
not write a better line of code,
Yeah.
design a greater interface, or do something different at that point.
a better
It became
customer discovery. It was none of those.
It became an economic conversation all of a sudden, and we allowed it to become that because it kind of got out of our control and everybody else in the industry's control. Now, I actually think that was great for the industry and for technology and the way applications are
Not
built
for
and
your,
helping
that
scale.
business, but for the industry, yes.
Yeah, it was crappy for us as individuals. A bunch, we talked earlier about job security. A bunch of people ended up getting laid off in that one. That was
Yeah.
my first experience actually letting somebody go. And
Had nothing to do with the quality of your product.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it had something to do with the quality of our foresight.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, but you're not able to bundle that. Should bundling be allowed?
Yeah.
I feel like it. Really? You don't think it's anti-competitive?
I want to hear I gave you an answer
Yeah.
earlier. Now I want to hear the context for why you don't think it
Why
is.
not?
And then we'll talk.
So I think that it stifles innovation. I find, having worked at big companies, where I work, I think that what ends up happening, you get some really brilliant teams and ideas that are growing, and then all of a sudden they get plucked, by a Microsoft, by Cisco's, the IBMs that are really good at finding and acquiring. They get sucked in, and then that product eventually gets white labeled and goes away. And I feel like the products don't become, because the initial startups were like super lean, super efficient. They were really good at solving the problem. And I find that the reason they get sold is usually because the VCs want to get the paid. The only really way to get the payment is you go IPO or you get bought. Though, because the concept was if you get big enough, you're then going to compete against Microsoft and they're just going to crush you on costs. Google's going to crush you on costs. And so I find that, I get it as a consumer that there's some things that has been awesome in the consolidation. But I from an enterprise software standpoint.
James, just put this aside. It's not just forget software, forget technology, just look at life in general, right?
Okay.
It's just evolution. There are lots of things that are going to get eaten up by the survival of the fittest concept always wins, because you didn't know in that startup phase of databases whether his company would have made it or Access would have got acquired or SQL Server was acquired from it. Nobody knew. Would Microsoft ever have had a huge play in the database industry? Also wasn't known at that time. Everybody's playing the cards they have.
We just shifted at that
and
point.
things will keep shifting. So I don't know if it's when things have already happened, and just because a company has become large and we start calling it or labeling it as evil,
monopoly.
it's kind of a little inappropriate.
But I'd love to get an example, because there were several in my mind as you were talking. I'd love to get an example. What's something you think
is worthy of bundling and you like it?
Or on its
got
own?
bundled that it just it killed it in the long run.
Well, I'm worried
Give me an
about
example.
the whole, merger of, was it Figma?
Adobe.
And Adobe.
Yeah.
All right. That product, there's a reason why it shot up to the point where it became used by a lot of designers, because it didn't have the bloatedness that Adobe had, and it did more what they wanted. And Adobe hadn't really innovated in a while. And so they're like, $20 billion.
Yeah.
We should acquire.
And that's happened in many cases in Adobe's history, Microsoft's history,
So we
Facebook's
could-
No, but I
history.
know.
we could talk about the reasons to acquire and the reasons to be acquired.
Sure.
If you want. It's
a good conversation.
Back to this notion of why
Bundling.
I so definitively said I think it's a good thing. I think commoditization is inevitable.
Yeah.
I think people get so focused on innovation kind of for innovation's sake and what's interesting about it, and lose sight of value creation.
Okay. That's a good one.
Customers having great value.
At scale.
Yeah.
And yes,
Yeah.
and when you do things at scale,
Then commoditization happens.
it is tricky though to maintain enough flexibility. It's the classic 80-20 thing people try to focus on, to maintain enough flexibility and openness. But that is where a healthy ecosystem comes into play. So I think Figma, a different story, and we could talk about it as an example. But if you look at what's happened in the database industry, you look at what's happened in business intelligence, you look at what's happened is happening right now in AR and VR. I think we're at a similar inflection point, for example, in AR, where people are recognizing There will be headsets. The cost needs to come down. The compute power all exists and is there. And what needs to happen now is an ecosystem needs to go around it that makes practical applications to give you transformative value.
Yeah.
And it's that last mile value that needs to come from a large ecosystem. It's wicked hard for a small startup to build a real ecosystem that's a great thing. It's actually really hard for even a growth company with 10,000 people to do that effectively. There can be great value creation, value realization in the world that comes from scale and standardization. And what does bundling do?
It actually accelerates that.
Well, but how?
Well, the fact is, if the big player already has the scale, and this addition gives them that additional incremental feature or function, then you're giving it to everybody.
Yep. So just
that's
like
what you're doing.
So just like we did at 9 Mile, now put it in the customer-related milestone.
Yeah.
Put it in the outside-in value exchange that we talked about.
And then it's gonna happen.
It lowers, but what it does, Sandy,
Lowers cost.
It lowers cost of acquisition. It increases distribution and availability.
Distribution, yeah.
And potentially creates an easier learnability or on-ramp from a design perspective because it's got an adjacency to something else that it's integrated with, so it becomes more acceptable. If you don't have adoption and consumption, you don't have value.
Yeah.
And just to build on that, let's say it's any new feature, whether it's in the AR space, AI space, any of the spaces. If a big platform player is also going to support openness and APIs and lots of people can build the last mile solutions, or it's a small little company that did that. They both had the ideas of openness, but this one will have millions of developers, this one probably had 10,000. So now you suddenly
Kind of
have
like
the access.
Kubernetes and what Google did there.
It's about giving access. And yes, in the mix, the VCs are going to make some money, some startups are going to make some money, some are going to die. That's how the world evolves.
I see how you're saying, because like in the same principle of pharmaceutical drugs and research and development, it's super expensive. And so people have to be compensated eventually.
Yeah.
So you can keep doing more research and development.
And look, the innovator's dilemma is a real thing.
What is the innovator's dilemma for our new young audience?
There you go. It's that notion that says eventually you get to a point where you're trying to please so many that it gets very difficult to do the thing that is net new and take the risk. I mean, the classic case of this is looking at Windows on-premise and bundling licensing in an OEM world that exists.
And in 9 Mile Labs and in a lot of other startup culture, you'll hear this. These startups are the ones who are great at innovation, but not great at scale. Right. The big companies are great at scale, not great at innovation in general. Those are true stereotypes. So that's why the marriage does make sense, right?
Yeah.
And it's very hard for startups at a very early stage to even know how to work with big companies. So it's always somewhere in the middle where they get to that product market fit, they get into that growth stage.
Even us at scale at Splunk, we're number one in security. Trifecta, the analyst community will acknowledge that for now. That's right, for now.
Yeah. Who knows what could happen, right? It keeps you on your feet.
No, it's totally a great thing. But what I like about having being disruptive as one of our core values is the notion that says we should really be constantly open to disrupting ourselves. And yet that's a thing we've got to get much.
I like that.
We have to get
self-disruption.
much better at. And there's a couple ways to drive disruption for yourself.
How do you do it within?
Well, I think part of it is you make sure that you're always creating some percentage of your resourcing and cycles once you've started to scale that are kind of on off-the-books projects.
On innovation.
Yeah. And you don't go do that in a vacuum where you're building something you think you should go build. You go do co-innovation with your customers.
Actual customers.
Okay,
That's
so
most important
there's
thing.
two of the things I just heard is you allow off the books innovation, meaning that it's not tied to necessarily
The classic operating
like a
metrics
P&L
of
Different,
growth.
yes. You
And
pull
then-
it out of the P&L, different rhythm, different schedule. It's still measured.
And then the second one was you said doing it within feedback from the customer.
No,
Is that what you said?
Even stronger. Co-development with your customer. Go back to what you would have done in
Co-development,
your startup, which is
Yep.
here's the benefit of being in a big company or a large-scale growth company with, especially if you've got a brand people love, right? They want your help.
Yeah.
They will let you help them solve other problems if you just bother to ask,
Yeah.
hey, what's an adjacent problem you're working on right now that's hard?
Yeah.
And then you have some resources available in a pool that you can go through at that and say, look, I don't know, there's 3 possible outcomes of this thing. It's going to be a product for us and it's going to be great. It's not going to be a product for us and I'm going to hand you the code that we co-developed together, and you can take it forward if you want to, or the professional services or consulting firm will help you with it. Or, looked like a good idea, smelled like a good idea,
It'll
tasted
just die on the vine.
It's dead.
Yeah.
obviously we are in an economic recession probably for at least another couple more years. And a lot of companies, unfortunately, have slashed their R&D budgets. You're right. And just some of them completely, like, there was news about a certain company, rhymed with Google, that got rid of Area 120, right? And some of those projects there. What are your thoughts on, I get the idea to save money, but during an economic downturn, actually stifling innovation like that and cutting those groups? Do you feel like you should be doing that during it? Or because I know, because people see it as it's not going to be generating revenue, maybe only 1 in 1,000 projects.
I think it's a percentage thing. I'll let him answer. Okay. It was how much was going on? If your bloat on that was 60% and your core business was 40,
true,
there clearly was a problem.
How much was going on? Yeah. How long has it been going on? Is it immeasurable? Is it consistent with I'm not going to go do disruption to physical transportation and try to make a better axle. Or a self-driving car in my current business.
Is it adjacent?
That's not what I'm going to do. There is an adjacency and a relevance to the thing. And one of the most beautiful things about and why I emphasize co-development with customers is some significant percentage of what you do. The customers will keep you adjacent.
Yeah. I want to dig deeper into that because there's a philosophy here we have which is around human desirability, right? Whatever you build, you're doing it to innovate and help some humans and improve the planet maybe in some cases too. The viability is what everybody talks about. And in fact, we started coining a new term here. It's not minimum viable product, it's minimum desirable product.
Yeah, we used minimum lovable at my last company. I think
same
some
concept,
do that as well.
Same concept.
Yeah.
So if you are building it for somebody, and I just want to explore a little deeper into your philosophy around this, we find there are certain wants and needs that customers logically tell you about. And then you code those, build them, do a prototype, 1 iteration, 2 iterations, and then it doesn't really get adopted that well. What's the gap? What is it that happens there? So of course, I agree with you 100% that whatever you build, it should be grounded in the realities of their current wants and needs. Is there something else beyond wants and needs that creates friction in adoption? And I want to stay on that for a little bit.
There's a lot.
Tell us about that.
There's a lot that creates friction in adoption and can create friction to your ability to discover whether you're building the right thing or not. I think some of the biggest, we've talked before about startups that are at a point where right idea, wrong timing.
Yeah.
Right. And that's another way of saying there was something about the market environment or the capability or capacity of the market or the customers to go adopt and get something done. And the same is very true. You can create the minimum viable, minimum lovable, what do you guys call
minimum
it?
Desirable.
Minimum desirable sort of product and get it there. But especially if you're doing something disruptive and new, unless it's very much an encapsulated consumer kind of play in a product, you're driving a fundamental change in the behavior of not just one person, but an entity, an organization, right? And so it fits with the priorities of the company, great, but if it's too hard to implement or carries too much of a, too much
psychological barrier,
training, almost a systems interaction barrier. It's the conversation we were having about the brain working, synapse, closing those synapses or making the firing more consistent.
It doesn't fire.
If you can't cross the chasm of getting somebody to change their behavior, that if you can't get procurement to change their behavior and allow you to buy it, or legal to change their behavior and allow you to accept onboard a vendor that isn't already approved through a normal channel and maybe doesn't have all your BCR requirements fulfilled.
How are you going to have that? That's another barrier altogether. Get it done?
And yet you got the poor guy sitting in the business unit, guy or gal in the business unit. It's like, this is the greatest thing in the world. I want it. And yes, you just did everything I said. But you know what? Actually,
there are larger forces at play.
Yeah, and so this is where you see so many startups and companies. If you think about people locally here, it's where I think Tableau was quite effective. It's actually where at Microsoft with sticking with the BI space, which is one area I owned as well. I think it was quite effective to come in and do a departmental play because departments have certain amount of budget, certain amount of freedom. It's a smaller
line of business IT.
Play.
It's
and
not
two things occur when you make the pool a little bit smaller. One is there's fewer actors and people that you need to coordinate.
Yeah.
And number two is some leader somewhere with enough context on what's happening is willing to take a risk and bend a rule somewhere.
Yeah.
This is where the departmental selling motion is so
Yes.
powerful. And then where people fail to get escape velocity is they don't recognize that now all of a sudden, in order to get escape velocity, you have to find the inflection point where not only do two departments want it,
Yeah.
but there's a value proposition for the C-level or cost savings for procurement,
Yeah.
or you've done the work that's necessary in your product for tutorial integration and ease of use and documentation to make training easy. You're not going to reach the growth stage of escape velocity unless you recognize you're playing in an ecosystem and that buyers and users are two totally different people.
Totally different. I do want to close out on that with one comment. 1 second, sorry. This is a good takeaway for startups.
Take it away.
If you're doing B2B,
Yeah.
he just gave the nugget on this, which is critical. If you're doing B2B, there are those two strategies. You can do LOB, you can get through without procurement,
Line of
without
business.
IT,
Yep.
line of business, you can do that. However, there will come a point where IT and procurement will get involved,
Yeah.
you get too much traction. So don't think you'll ever escape the enterprise buying behavior. It will come and hit you.
And every company has different, like 6-month cycles.
No, but what will happen is lots of companies got a lot of traction with the departments, but couldn't figure out how to get that thing working with IT and procurement.
don't ignore it
And they would
too
shut it
long.
down, actually. They would shut you down.
Don't ignore it too long,
Yeah.
or your lead evaporates and the big folks come in and do a good enough job because they've already got the
Exactly.
infrastructure to bridge the rest
And-
of the
and you
gap.
know
And they'll
what?
wipe you out.
And you lose, and your favorite disruptor
The
gets
bundler.
bought by a big
And they'll
company
bundle
gets
it in.
bundled in.
That's why I like to joke that Microsoft's the just good enough company. Having worked for them for
No,
5
but
years.
if you're doing it at scale and making it
That's what-
available, value's being
because
provided.
and that's
It's
what I'm saying.
reliable, it's consistent, it's
And
not
that
going
is
away.
it. This
And
is
that's
the
not
thing
necessarily an attack at Microsoft. It's what works for them.
No, it's the value of big corporation, actually.
Yeah.
It is a huge value because without that, where do you have the reliability of that being available to you?
Yeah.
I learned
You
a
won't have
lesson
it.
at Microsoft. Satch'd probably be upset to hear me say this out loud, but we all know it was true, at least for a while. Sometimes your ability to go spend the money and buy a company was the difference between doing something and doing nothing in the space. Sometimes especially we think about this at almost any scale company about small technical acquisitions, tuck-ins, or acqui-hires. Those are enabling things to enable the company to execute on something that it otherwise lacked the capability to go do in its own.
Yeah.
And those are very valuable. And so sometimes people look at that and, oh no, the thing was acquired by a big company, when in fact, it's already on the company's organic growth path and the things that they're going to go do. And when you can find the marriage with the entrepreneurs who aren't just trying to exit, but actually are capable of functioning in that environment, they can be incredibly effective and realize their dream a heck of a lot faster. But you gotta, again, it comes back to being intentional. Maybe back to this conversation about us being really clear the first time we sit across the table from each other about where you're coming from and where I'm coming from,
Good
what
point.
our intentions
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
And then we can figure out whether this is a marriage that's gonna work or not, or whether it's just about money for you and it's about something different for me.
Yeah.
What I
As long as
like
you're clear
about, I
it.
think an example too that you mentioned about like you want to win multiple sides of the house is about understanding what the value proposition of your product is. So for example, security, I think a lot of times people think, oh, it's just checking off the box from a hack, but also it's actually a very big CFO conversation around the fraud. Or like the minute, let's say like you do get hacked, like there is a huge implication on the financial like dollars, trust could be eroded. Look what happened, with the whole big thing that happened with Target back in the day where the credit card systems got hacked.
It's not a question of will you be attacked, if you will be attacked, or when. You are being attacked. It is
constantly.
happening. It's happening constantly. And the more digital our world
And what
is-
happens when it gets exposed to your brand
Yeah. So the way we think about this at Splunk, and what I want to make more broadly accessible to everybody, is this idea that says, we have to. You and I talked about purpose, and we have a purpose statement in the company, which is to build a safer and more resilient digital world, and that's a recognition that stuff happens, and resilience is what matters.
Yeah.
It's your ability to go detect something early and catch it before it gets large, to absorb that shock and ultimately make
prevent
sure
that big thing.
Make sure that it didn't become a big thing and you caught it while it was small. And then you start thinking about, if I'm not constantly reacting to the oh crap, I found it late and it's bigger than I thought and I don't have a pattern for reacting to it.
You could become
then
proactive at some
I
stage.
can be proactive about something and focus on where I want to transform that makes my business different. And so that's to me resilience. I mean, we're going along, think about it in our personal lives. We're going along in our personal lives with the intention of getting a set of things done. And you break your arm, thank goodness you have access to good medical care because you bothered to invest in insurance ahead of time. And a relationship with a care practice and somebody else that might understand you're an athlete and you're capable of rehabbing, getting on your feet sooner, and things get customized to you. Resilience is what it means to us as individuals. It's that value and satisfaction I get about how I respond, and it's the same for most companies. It's the values of the company, the policy of the amount of risk they want to absorb, how much impact they're willing to take from things. And you got to enable people to go, companies, just like you enable people, to go find the intersection of that works well for them.
Let's say you have children that are about to go into college.
I have a kid in college.
Or let's say he's about to graduate then.
Right.
What advice would you give them knowing like where the future is going today? On maybe their passions or because you said the first 20 years is the exploratory. Yeah.
Same advice. Yeah, maybe not the first 20 years. I think the first 2 jobs.
Sorry, I meant your 20s, not your first 20.
Yeah.
First 2 jobs.
It's the advice I've already given. I guess I've given her one extra piece of advice. So one, I said, look, this is a time to explore and figure it out. And my other piece of advice to her has been, say yes to a lot of stuff and don't be fearful. Just if you're gonna explore and learn,
you're gonna fail. That's okay.
Yeah, and you also can't be afraid of the unknown in taking the first step. And whether it's, I think, for ourselves as individuals, or certainly the larger you get as a company, inertia is one of the things you've got to overcome. Once you get an object in motion, you have, most objects, easier time to control it and drive it. Yeah, but if you can change its trajectory just a little bit, now you can start to kind of shape it and control it. And what are we doing in our 20s if not beginning to shape our lives?
Yeah. That's good. And then what advice would you give to fellow executives that are also dealing with this uncertainty? Whether it's, and how you would advise them to
It's similar. I mean,
navigate these uncharted waters.
Yeah, look, I'm 6 months into a new gig, and you can't have a new leader come into a company without it affecting the shape of what you're doing in some way. It just is. We bring ourselves with, to the job, and I find that one of the things I run into with a lot of executives that are growing, particularly in a product area, is there tends to be this resistance to change because we think we have a plan and that's what we're executing on. My goodness. Embrace it.
Stay open to it.
No, this is a moment, whether it's, you talked about, constraints, economic constraints on people's budgets and ability to grow and the rest of those things. Try not to approach those things from I'm just going to get through it perspective, which I think a lot of people do when making cuts in budgets and unfortunately when you're affecting people's lives and layoffs. Approach those things instead from a perspective which says, okay, change has been foisted upon me. What was hard before? What felt like a waste of time before? What's the opportunity that I want to have? If I were to double this change, I'm not saying particularly when it comes to humans' employment and their jobs and those sorts of things, I'm not saying double the people impacted. But what if I was to literally take a factor larger change right now? Could I say no to a set of things that felt like a distraction or weren't getting escape
more
velocity?
Prepared.
Or could I double down on something else that I've been wanting to do or get done? And I think we get into these modes operationally where we allow the process to take over or the short-term tactical intent to come in and we say, oh no, because it's a change. I think every change is an opportunity to just
step back,
just pop up to the, the
2x,
the
3x.
balcony a little bit
and
just look at the whole thing and go, yeah, that part's not working and that's unused space and I don't like it. And
by the way, I heard you use the balcony term. Are you saying balcony and dance floor? That's the analogy you're using?
It's the balcony dance floor.
Tell the audience about that. It's a very good analogy. It's a very good analogy on management.
So there's this idea as a manager that you can get too far removed and not pay attention to what's going on and be connected to your people. And that what you're really trying to do is create as much as you can this fluid and kind of beautiful dance for people to interact and get stuff done. And so that's the dance floor that's there. it's really important to step away and look at it all from the balcony because that's your job. Your job's not to be a
to be on the
dancer
dance
all
floor
the time.
yourself.
Yeah. Your job's to be taking a look at it all and making sure that it's flowing and, figure out, hey, do we know enough? Can we learn another dance? Can we advance from the foxtrot today?
Yeah.
But you got to run back down the stairs and get onto the dance floor.
And one other tip on that, by the way, when you do it, when you step away, you got to almost find some humor in it because you're not dancing anymore. And it is actually a little humorous from the balcony. Yeah. And then you can think more objectively. Because say I'm panicking about what's happening in my job right now. And on the dance floor, there's no escaping it. You're in the middle of that panic. You step away, and just like Tom said, what if it got 2 times worse? What would I do? In the balcony, you can do it. So it's a pretty awesome technique.
Mr. Sharma, I'm going to ask the Casey's over here. Can you think of an example of a CEO that did that really well? I have one.
Yeah, go.
I want to hear who do you think does, who did a really, that could be gone.
So we go to being a homer here, I guess, in a way, but going back to my experience at Microsoft even, I actually think, say whatever you want about Bill, I think Bill did a great job of this.
Bill Gates. Okay. Sorry, we don't know him on a first name basis.
Hey, look, when I'm talking about somebody at Microsoft, you're lucky I'm just not talking in terms of their email alias. It's just the way we still...
BG. B Gates.
I have friends who still refer to me as Tomcast. So
oh my God, I love that.
But I thought, Bill had baked into his rhythm as things scaled, demo days and periods where he was just stepping back and looking at how things were coming together and working and ideas. He would take Think Week famously, which I think was a great thing. It
was very good.
And, what I took away from that for myself that was really important was you gotta, as a leader, you have to create space in your calendar to think. You have to create space to climb up in the balcony and do the observation as well as, and part of what you're trying to do is observe yourself, which is really hard. But you get completely removed, you observe what's happening, you now observe how that maps into what you think the priorities are and what should be happening and where you should be spending your time. And then that allows you to make smarter adjustments.
Yep.
You can't do it all the time, but you got to bake it into your rhythm. And I think that's one of the things I learned from observing Bill.
So my example is Walt Disney. I felt like
it's a great example.
Well, because I still remember there's still footage of him telling all his designers about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Because he had this vision mapped out in his head. And he sent everyone, I still remember the story, he sent everyone to give them each $20, go get food, come right back, I want to tell you about this story. And he acted out the whole Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Wow.
And all the characters did the voice of the witch with, it's a wishing apple, right? But he was like animated and walked it through. But like to your point, he was able to get it on the floor, show people how you do it, and then step away, and then also be building a freaking amusement park and a theme park, and how they then... And then he could write the hub and spoke model, like one of the original hub and spokes models. Like here, if we do here, we can expand and reuse.
Magical.
And I think that's like it goes back to the magic of a founder, though. Bill Gates was a founder who knew the product, but also was like, I guess, had the skill set to step away and think of the future vision. I think one of my favorite things about Bill was his foresight into the Xbox, right? Like, what a crazy concept that became it changed the industry. And I think it's an awesome like notage for them because they weren't the first to get video gaming. Atari and all these other players had been there for a while, and he's like, we should be getting into that. And
but even the inputs he gave to Comcast very early, and Comcast today for content, he's like, it's going to be on the internet, and content is going to be commodity. You just have the last mile. If you just have the last mile only and nothing else for it, you'll have nothing. So open it up. They opened it up.
What's up?
I'd love to come back to this notion of it's about the founder.
Maybe I went too much onto that. But
no, it's great. It's a really interesting thing, and I was thinking about it in terms of Disney and your Disney story. I think the founder element of Disney is that clarity of vision and purpose. It's like I know who we are. There's an element of here's the story. I'm going to tell you all the story in its entirety. Now you go bring it to life. Mm-hmm. That only scales so much. And you're also somewhat limited by what you're able to think of and create. And so there's a danger in overdoing that, but there's a value in the preservation of your brand and the, realizing the intention you had in building a company. You take, the other example I gave it's more about rhythm and process and a generalized pattern. And you go read about Jack Welch, you go read about a variety in his GE time, you read about a variety of people leaders coming into other companies and turning them around. And I think you can find examples of both of those things. And a lot of the common threads are, hey, we're going to get really crisp on who we are, who we want to be.
Mm-hmm. Stick.
What matters and what
core.
doesn't. Yep. Define the negative space because that helps you define the positive.
Lou Gerstner at IBM.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He completely turned them around. Yeah. Sorry, you were getting it.
No, you got it. Exactly. Yeah. And then you structure not just your organization and your teams, but you structure your time to still make room for observation of what's happening, adjustment. And then the only other thing I think leaders have to bring is this fearlessness around change or embracing of change, where it's like, hey, that part of the dance floor isn't functioning the way I would expect it to be anymore, or
change the
dance is old and I don't like it. We're
improvise.
We're gonna do a different one.
Yeah. Advancement in technology had always been to reduce the physical labor, but now with these large language models, and to your point, it's starting to reduce the need for human judgment. I feel like in a lot of aspects.
That's my worry.
That exactly. That it's getting.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah. What? Sorry, not about me. It's you.
Yeah. So. No, I have no wisdom, just some experience and certainly some opinions. So I think the danger is people assuming judgment. Good judgment is codified in the training and the models and what happens. And the other thing, we talked earlier about kind of brain function and how every brain's a little bit different and every human's a little different in what we desire and value. And to me, it's pretty critical that that human judgment element about whether the answer I'm getting is within tolerance meaningful enough to me, right?
Yep.
And so my fear, because of the way social media has driven so much engagement for people, and this kind of want to project with kids. We know this one, that want to project a desire that you're norm to some ideal somewhere. That actually stifles innovation and everything else, because it's the anomalies that become interesting later. It's the uniqueness of how we apply and interpret information. And so I love all the automation aspects of it. Don't get me wrong. I love it, love it, love it. But I do fear a little bit that this is one of those things where we could see more people taking the path Italy or whoever did, where they're worried about privacy.
They just blocked it off completely.
And they block it completely, and then we don't realize the potential value that is there from exploration of it.
The way I see it is, it's like your own personal subject matter expert that you trust, but you verify. Yeah. Always verify.
I think of it more as a researcher or a research assistant than a subject matter expert.
Sorry, executive assistant.
I prefer that because you're guiding it and not trusting it. It's just helping you do the research.
Executive assistant. I think it's great for forming outlines. Like, for example, recently I gave it a whole bunch of bullet points and I said, now cluster these into themes that I would then send over to the customer to choose out of. I loved that because it's really good at summarization. At least some of the models are, right?
By the way, voice of customer research. We get a lot of abstract interviews. We throw it in, give us themes.
And I think it's brilliant for design shops, because what they can do is say, I want something that's going to accommodate these types of demographics. Show me what that looks like. Boom. And now you can start as a design shop, though. This is the framework it gave us. Because we know psychology, we understand all these other things. Do we think this meshes our demographics? What would we adjust to that? And because then you don't spend a designer to have to spend like 20 hours just coming up with the first mock-up. Instead, you're like, it's populated to you in an hour, and now your days are more productive. But my fear, like to the issue of, is that we've seen examples where like GPT-4 knows how to lie now.
Yeah, it's in the red cards.
But look,
it's in the red cards that were released.
If societally we approach it the right way, this is one of those. This happened with lots of other technology where there's a breakthrough, there's a potential for its overuse, and then we get to a more normative point where we know how to use it and understand what works. This one right now, anything that enters kind of this kind of a hype curve, I always worry about the wasted time and wasted value of getting there. It'll
stabilize at some point.
But you know what? It's also part of the human condition and kind of the way we tend
All
to
right,
form ideas.
I mean,
So
it could be a human condition where we end up not existing.
Yeah, we got you are a very pessimistic young man, I'll tell you.
No, I don't know if it's pessimism or it's more just like I have unfortunately become somewhat of a cynic regarding. I've now observed how people put their own interests at best, and they haven't been, I feel like, the best stewards of certain things. Like you talk about climate change, and I feel like there's a lot of things we could be doing, in the United States, putting a lot of infrastructure around solar power, a lot of stuff about like nuclear power becoming properly energy independent
in every situation,
and we're not. And I think it goes back to the fact that just most people. I was talking about the stat in the previous podcast about how they did surveys of what is important to Americans, and it's less about community. It used to be like 67% people cared about community. It's now like 27% care about the community impact.
Ouch.
And the thing that only increased on what people focused on was
Making
the
money,
desire
right?
to make money.
Yeah.
And so to your point,
scary.
that's why I have become somewhat, because less people are concerned about the ramifications of things. They're just like, oh, I will use it for my own self-interest. And so, but that's why eventually I want to run for office. Is like, I feel like I'm a pretty good moderate independent who will try to provide both sides of the story. Now I just need a backer.
Yeah. All right, I'm backing you. Rapid fire. You doing it?
Rapid fire. Okay, I got the Red Bull. Let's go.
So it's 10 seconds.
Okay.
What's your next place that you want to go to on a travel? Where do you want to travel next?
I can't do that in 10 seconds.
All right, favorite meal.
I'm a pizza guy. I hate to say it. But
Do you put pineapple?
No pineapple.
All right. So
no
he's
fish. No fish on pizza.
Not anchovies?
No, not a fan.
I love it.
Keep going.
All right. Well, that also goes for like the takeout order.
Yeah.
Do you favorite memory?
I think I have many in my life. First time I went to the Grand Canyon and kind of faced my fear of heights before walking down and sitting on the edge of the canyon with a couple of my sisters at my side. And
That's so cool.
Having that sense
What
of
a cool
support.
memory.
That's a good one.
It took a while before I could see through the fear and understand how beautiful the scene was. But
a good one.
I spent years hiking in the canyon. Those were vacations.
Live long and prosper or the force?
I'm a bit of a force guy, but I really appreciate. I do really appreciate Star Trek and the
Next Generation or
No,
like the OG stuff?
No, I'm classic OG guy.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
If you could master one new skill, what would it be?
I'm still trying to master the guitar, and I'm so far off.
The
from
guitar or
that.
guitar?
Guitar.
Okay.
Sitar. Is there an guitar? There's a sitar.
That's what I was
Is that what you meant? I was too. I was puzzled on that one.
It's like.
It's close.
Hey, look, I've mastered the guitar at this point. I just don't get it.
All right. One thing most people don't know about you, but they should.
I'm not worried about what people know about me or don't know about me, to be honest. I love if somebody's inquisitive and, cares to engage me on a topic. I think that's fantastic. But I'm not a real, Sandy knows this. I'm a little more of an introvert, and I like keeping some things for myself.
Look, what we like to do here on this show at the end is give you things to plug that you're passionate about, whether it's in the community, whether it's with your job, the
Or
companies
any
you work
causes,
with, any
anything.
causes. Raise awareness. Go.
Great. So, two things. One, I am really committed around this notion of building a safer and more resilient digital world. At Splunk, that's what we're trying to do. I encourage everybody to think about, this notion of what you can do to be better prepared for what may happen, observe it as it's happening, minimize the impacts of the little bad things before they become big.
And are y'all hiring at Splunk?
We are.
All right. So everyone, you
are
should go check out
selectively-
Splunk.careers or careers.splunk or whatever it is.
That's great. Great opportunity to get involved and learn more and prepare yourself for the future.
And do you offer remote work?
We do. We're very
That's
committed. By
huge.
the way, we are very committed around remote. We think that's really
great.
important. This is, again, one of those things the world threats to change at
Yeah.
us all. I'm a big believer in embracing it and working differently, and the company was too, and that was part of why I joined.
That was your first one? You had one more, you said?
Yeah, I think the second one is, you mentioned communities. Man, we got to take care of our communities and the places we live and our environments. And so, a lot of focus for me is around, we live in this beautiful place in the Pacific Northwest. It's great privilege. And whether it's something like the Whidbey Camino Land Trust I've been involved with, Mountains to Sound Initiative, I know other people focus on.
Oh my
here.
God.
Anything that helps us preserve the habitat, particularly where the forests meet the sea here, is so important. And you don't have to get involved in my thing, but man, get involved where you live.
In
and
nature.
Take care of the people around you and the world around you.
Planet. Thank you so much. If they follow you on your LinkedIn, you said you also have a blog, right?
Yeah, at Splunk, there's plenty posted there, and so I share some thoughts there.
All right, we'll put the
what's happening
links
industry-wise and otherwise.
underneath the subscription for his name. Tom Casey, thank you so much for a very fun, engaging conversation. Sandy, you want to send anything off?
Thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
I'm your host, James Archeri.
I'm Sandy Sharma.
Take care, everyone.